We are back, baby.
We're back Monday morning.
Yes, Monday morning with the pro presenter Poppy himself, Steve Allen Dirks. Oh no,
Alan
no,
Dirks.
you told me. Sorry, you told me your real middle name is Alfonso. So I apologize for that.
Oh, wow.
Stephen
Uh,
Alfonso Dirks.
oh, that's
Steve,
funny.
I forgot to mention. I met your parents recently.
You did. You got to meet my
I met Ma and Pa Dirks.
Ma and Pa Dirks.
Yeah. Got to tell them what a fan I am of their son.
How much do I owe you for that? How much do I owe
Steve, I
you
did
still?
it out of the goodness of my heart.
Yeah.
But for
Uh,
real though, we do need a consultant, a pro presenter consultant, so we'll call it even.
we'll call it even. Okay, cool. So, well, sweet. You want to dive into today?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go right into it.
So today's feature in Pro that I wanted to show you guys is something that maybe Sheik, you can tell me. I think it's super helpful across a lot of your worship spaces because oftentimes you've wanted to have stuff happening in the room, um, showing content in the room that's customized for a screen in the room, but then you want to be able to just like run an announcement loop somewhere else. And so ProPresenter came out with the announcement feature, which allows you to, in essence, dedicate a screen to only show content that's on that specific trigger point. And I think it's an amazing feature because not every church can run a huge, like, if you're, depending on your size of your church, at some point you're going to be able to run a big video hub and you're going to have a dedicated computer that just runs your signage or have a dedicated, like,
Mhm.
Mac Pro Presenter machine that runs your digital slides. So at some point, you probably don't need this. It's probably not something that you're interested in. But for a smaller church, and I'm at a church plant, if there ever was a desire to hook up a screen somewhere else in the building and not show what's happening in the room, but show announcement content, I would have to look at this feature heavily because it allows me to do that. I'm thinking for kids
Yeah,
ministry
and
too, that has to be helpful too, right?
yeah, and I'll tell you what. So I at the last church where I was a kids pastor, where I oversaw the kids ministry, we had this huge like 3 by 3 grid screen in our check-in hallway, and we did have a dedicated machine for it, but it was pretty unwieldy, so it's not like you could just
Mm,
put any volunteer on it. So even though we had a dedicated computer, it would have been so much nicer to just be able to run it from our ProPresenter computer,
right, right.
where I know that the people that are using it know what they're doing,
Hmm.
and then I'm close to it at all times, because it was like we hardly updated it because it was just so difficult to. It was like the computer was buried in a little closet, and we had to, it was a mess. So this would
Right.
have made it
Much
way
better.
easier.
Much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, so let's dive in. I'm gonna share my screen here, and let me know if you guys have any trouble with seeing it, but in the chat. So the first thing to kind of explain to you where there's a couple parts that you're gonna have to do, a couple steps. Initially, I just want to show you within ProPresenter the way you access the announcement like section. It's this little target button up here. So when you have a presentation, usually you probably will see your presentations like this. It's grayed out. But you can click on it, and if you look, you'll see that there's the presentation selection made. And then if you were to click announcements, now it changes to green. So that's kind of a triggering point because oftentimes in the past, before 7, you've really just had one layer, the presentation layer. But you now have two distinct layers where you can send stuff to specifically for like that specific thing. So that's the first thing to know is that's how you get into putting content on the announcement layer. I'm going to show you more about that after we do a couple other steps. But the next step would be you'll need to actually set your screens up. So the way you'll do that is you'll go to screens, you'll go to configure screens, you'll need to add a screen for whatever you've run. So if you have a physical HDMI cable that's run through the wall to another monitor, maybe you have 3 or 4 TVs all connected with a hub. Whatever that signal is to get to that hub, you'll have to get that signal to this computer. So you'll have to plug it into the computer. There are multiple ways to do that. If you have any questions and you want to reach out to me, if your machine's kind of tapped out, there are some like graphics processors you can buy that would allow you to maybe convert like a bunch of your inputs into your outputs into one device that would send out multiple outputs. That's kind of somewhat expensive. So if that's not a good option for you, send me, feel free to hit me up, ProPresenter at churchvisuals.com. You can shoot me an email or drop a comment in the DMs, and Sheik and I can talk about what's your setup and how you can maybe do this. So you'll have to run a screen into your computer, and then you'll have to route that screen accordingly. So you would just add a screen, you would see it either shown up here, or you would potentially have like decklink cards that would show up. You would add a screen, and then once you add the screen with the specs, for example, Shake, you just mentioned yours was a weird resolution. If you're looking at mounting a TV that's in story mode, that would not be a 1920 by 1080 thing. That would be a 1080 by 1920 send, and then you would have to flip it at the TV, if that makes sense. So you'll need to look at 3 monitors by 3 monitors stacked. Gotcha, gotcha. So depending on what your resolution is, you may need to tweak that. So you'll get your screen set up. You're not going to do any alpha keying or anything weird. Really, you're just going to set the screen up and have a screen in your audience presentation area that is dedicated for content to be routed to. So once you have the screen set up, the second step is the following, is to create a look that has what you want set up. So we're going to go edit looks. I'm going to create a new look for us, and I'm going to call this, um, service and announcements. Okay. So in this matrix, we can now go through each screen and decide what we want to show. So outside of this room, outside of the worship room, I don't want any messages to show up. I don't want any props to show up. I don't want any video inputs to show up. I don't want any media to show up or slide content. I just want the announcement layer to show up. And then over on the room side, I do want everything to show up except for the announcement layer. So now I've set this to where the outside room gets the announcement layer, the inside room gets everything but that. And so now I have my setup set, and I'm going to hit make live. That'll set up this look to be intact. And then the other thing you'll need to do is you'll create your presentation with your slide deck. So I have an example slide deck here with a bunch of slides. And what you do is you activate that announcement layer by clicking into the announcements, and then you just click on the first slide, and you'll start to see those over here are starting to cycle through. So you'll notice that every few seconds, every 10 seconds, it'll change and it'll go to another slide. And now if you're like, well, hey, pre-service, I want to show the same slides in the room. Well, that's no problem. What we do is we'll just create another sorry, let me create another presentation that is dedicated for in the room. So you'll have to create 2 presentations. So you have one that's dedicated for the room and then one that's showing your slide content. Yep, I just duplicated a presentation that I had, the same presentation that I had, so it's the same slides. So then this, you notice here in the top of this one, I have not activated the announcement loop. So when I click on the slide, this will now begin to show. So now I have in the room slides going as well as slides going outside of the room. So this is where, let's say you don't want this welcome slide to show, you can disable that, and on in the room it'll show welcome, but on the outside of the room, in the gathering place or wherever you're at, it will not show that slide because that announcement layer is going in this slide deck. This slide deck is going on the main screens. So then where this is Go ahead. Yep, yeah, great question. So we'll go ahead and do this. We'll remove all the go to next timers, and I'll show you from start. So I populate, which it's struggling to populate the slides, but let's see if we can get them to show. Interesting. So okay, now they're beginning to show. So I have a bunch of slides loaded in here. They're just media items that I've drug in from my media bin. So I have a slide library that I'll bring stuff into. Once you've loaded up your slides in the order that you want, what I will do is I'll select one of them, command click, and that'll light it up with this orange and blue highlight. And then I'll hit command A, and that'll do all of them. I'll right click on it, everything within that presentation only. I'll right click on it and I'll hit go to next timer and I'll hit 10 seconds. And then I'll go to the last slide and I'll hit go to next timer again. And at this point, I will select loop to beginning. And now that'll all loop. But there is another way to do that. There is another way to do this. And the other way to do this would be to, at the top of your presentation, you see this little arrow icon. And you see how it says 5, 10, 15, 20, or custom. I can hit 10, and what that'll now do is that every 10 seconds it'll automatically take care of rotating the slide. Um, so you don't even have to hit the go to next button. The only reason you'd hit the go to next button might be if you want to individually control time length for each one. So if you wanted to have a different time length for each one, you might choose to use that option instead of this option. This option this option should auto repeat back from what I know about this. So we'll confirm that here, but we're looking here and it'll auto go back to the beginning. So if you use this option, it's just going to continue to cycle through that whole entire presentation every 10 seconds, kind of thing. Yeah, so if your content is loaded in as a background, not a foreground, it won't work properly because it'll go through the slides it'll click, 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 click because it doesn't trigger as a background triggers as there's not content to hold for. A foreground on these things will actually hold. So you have to have all this content here as a foreground, not a background. Because if it's a background, you'll just start seeing it'll cycle through all of them on an endless repeat kind of thing. So yeah, so you can do it within the program itself. So within the presentation itself, you can go here and change something to a foreground or a background. You can also go down into the slides, command click, select all, and you can change them to a background or foreground, whatever you want. So what I would do is if you import them all as backgrounds and just go in and select them all as foregrounds and then drag them into your presentation again. Yep. So then once we get into a service, now I'm going to start a countdown, and you'll notice here that there's a countdown rolling in the room, but the slides are still showing on the outside of our room. So we're showing now the service is starting, but outside in the room, nothing has changed. It's continuing to show that content the way that we've asked it to. When we get to the countdown, at the end of the countdown, and we go into the first song, I'm going to trigger the background to go into the song, and you'll notice nothing has changed on the outside of the room. And as I start to begin to present lyrics, nothing's changed. So this is how you can have something rolling with one computer and showing different stuff on the outside. And I mean, you can get complicated where if you wanted to start the service and then have some sort of like, welcome presentation loop that's just for guests, like, hey, connect with us, here's our QR code. You could create another presentation right after the welcome that would start just on the actual announcement layer and fire that, and it would start firing those slides, and then you would continue to roll on with your presentation. Okay. Sorry. That's weird because you're standby. That's interesting. Because I've got your. Because I can hear you. But hold on one second. Let me try to see an audio input. That's weird. Let me come back to you. Talk to me, Sheik.
Hello. Hello, everybody. What up? How are you
There you are.
guys?
There you are.
Oh,
It
there
must
I
just be
am.
on my. Hold on one second. It must just be on my share thing. So here we go. Let's go back. Okay, I got you fixed now.
Check, check, test.
So
I'm
you
back,
should be there.
baby.
Should be there. Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm glad I was repeating your questions, but my apologies, Shake.
No,
So
no.
yeah, so to recap, uh, you can show this content on both screens, so you now see that like content is showing outside the room. That's not any that doesn't look anything like what's happening in the room. Um, we talked about importing content into here and creating an automated playlist. That was one of Shake's questions. Just to recap that, and then I mentioned to you like you can have multiple playlists throughout your service. So if you wanted to have a playlist for welcoming your guests, or connections at the end of your service, where someone comes out and they see on your room, on the screens, stuff that's specifically focused on getting them to connect with church members or go to the connection center or whatever it is, you can do all that here.
Right.
So yeah, the key is the one thing that I actually setting up for this today was Shake. I was realizing you can't really, you could, but it's a little delicate when you start trying to go away from the presentation layer and run the same presentation with that, because it kind of starts to fire and independently of each other bring each other back. So if you go away from the announcement layer, you'll notice I still have the announcement layer showing content here because I haven't like cleared it. I just went away from that layer. And now if I were to try to go into a song, like it was what it was doing with me before was it was firing back to that slide in a weird way. So as it would transition at some point, it didn't, like, see right there, it just took over. So it wasn't doing it like when you thought it was, like it wasn't doing it right away, but it was at some point in the middle of the song taking over and
Wow.
controlling what I was doing. So the key I would say for you is to run them separate. So have your announcement layer presentation, have that set up as your announcement layer presentation, and then run your presentation layers separately. That way they're not competing with each other. So that's the one
Interesting.
key I would say is kind of making sure those stay separate, which would have to be something you would train your volunteers on, very, very clearly to kind of show them what would happen if they don't do that. So yeah,
And Steve, you mentioned earlier about being able to change the dimensions of your screen if you're horizontal, or I mean if you're vertical or whatever. At what point would you do that?
so you would do that on the startup phase. You'd want to figure out what
Okay.
you're going to have, and so if you're going to
Yeah.
have a resolution that's different than normal, you would create a screen. And for our sake, I'm just going to create a placeholder. And if I'm going to make it a vertical, kids welcome, and this is 1080 by 1920, that would be a vertical screen now that you would
Yeah.
see.
Okay.
So you would set that up there, and then you'll obviously have to build the content specific for that. So that's
Yeah.
one thing to
Right.
keep in mind is
Right.
that if you have a special screen like that, you'll build the content specifically for that. And then what I would probably do is I would probably have my own specific media library that is just for that content that's specific to it. So, welcome screen content. And that's where I would put those slides in that resolution that would go onto that presentation, if
Yeah.
that makes
Right.
sense.
Or, you could also hire us at Church Visuals to create
Absolutely.
that custom
Absolutely.
media for you.
Absolutely. We can help you do that for
And if
sure.
you did that, you get to talk to the ProPresenter Poppy himself.
You get two for
One
the price of
mano a
one.
mano.
Price of one,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so I think this is a really cool feature, to use in your space. I mean, there's even like if you really wanted to get down to it, one thing that you might notice in this like diagram here is, you could potentially look at showing like the announcement layer and then put like a screen like if you have a live feed pumping into your room, you could potentially like put the video input on that screen and show your live stream. So you could potentially play around with, depending on what you've got run in your room and how you've got your setup set up and all that. If you have your live stream pumping back into your presentation computer, you
Hmm.
could potentially show on the TVs out in the room what's happening in the room. Maybe your room's not big enough to actually live stream in the room, so you guys use graphics and stuff in the room, but you want to show what's outside to the people who are outside. You could potentially do that using this matrix and the looks matrix. So,
So then in that case, would you make like all your announcements would be lower thirds essentially?
you could make your announcements lower thirds and have the video screen coming in. So
Okay.
that's absolutely possible for sure.
Yeah, interesting.
So it's really
Wow.
cool to play with and to think about. Think about how this can be maximized for your worship space. Is there something you're trying to accomplish? And if so, I think ProPresenter really has the ability to help you do that in a really cool way. You might have to, depending on what you're trying to do, you may need to have an upgraded computer. A baseline computer probably wouldn't run everything. Um, but if you, depending on what kind of computer you have, an iMac, or if you have a more spec'd out computer that's on the higher level of the spectrum, you should be able to do a lot of this stuff and power a lot of this stuff just from within your production machine. So
Yeah. And maybe this goes without saying, but you could spit out those announcements on several different screens.
right, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I went to a church a couple months ago for an event with a partner, and we were running NDI to three
Hmm.
computer screens. And what we did was I ran one presentation off of one layer, the presentation layer, because they had another Mac
Yeah.
they weren't using. So I ran two of the screens off of the presentation layer and had slides looping, and then I had the announcement layer looping with a logo loop, and that was set differently.
Yeah.
So there was three screens in the room that were all run NDI virtual network that they had, which those boxes were, surprisingly they said a few $100s piece. So you might be a church if you're looking at how to do that. NDI could be a solution for you. But then, yeah, they were just using an iMac that was in the presentation space that was a spare kind of iMac for the producer, and they were running
Hmm.
content off of that, um, which was great. So, definitely is a great option to consider if that's something you need.
Right.
So, so really, the goal of this is just to show you, hopefully, an idea of like just to get your thoughts going. Is there something you're trying to do in your space to better serve your church, your kids, your students? Um, this is a tool to help you do that. So, maybe it's, hey, for my student ministry, I want to have a QR code with what the lesson is tonight for them to go and connect in their Bible app, or for, for,
Oh, that's
for,
fun.
for
Yeah.
kids, it's like, hey, here's what, I want the parents to see what we're teaching today. Here's a QR code to go to the landing page for what the lesson was, what are questions they can ask at home, like all that from there. So it's something to think about, like, use the technology to help you accomplish the ministry you want to accomplish in your church. And so if you're like,
Yeah.
man, I really would love to be able to present this, I just don't know how. I think in the past, the question's always been like, you have to buy a bunch more gear and it's a huge thing. And now it could be as simple as, can you run a wire in your room to your presentation computer and depending on what you're trying to present and how you're trying to do it, it could potentially be just a matter of adding that layer, adding something into your presentation machine, and letting it run. So,
Yeah, that's great, man. That would have been so helpful for me a year and a half ago.
yep. So, hopefully that helps you and serves you. Not a long one today, just kind of a quick tip. Hopefully that's something that helps you. I'd love to hear about your space. If this is something that you have done before, or you want to try to do, I would love to hear from you and see kind of what you're thinking, how um, how that can work in your space if you've done it. If you've never done it before, then and you're trying to do it, I'd love to talk with you through how you could accomplish that in your gathering. Um, as always,
And
you can
yeah,
feel free to reach out to us via this email below, ProPresenter@churchvisuals.com. What you think?
yeah. And I was gonna ask how you could reach us, but there you go. You did it. You're one
Right.
step ahead of me.
So, yeah. So, yeah, email us here. Let us know. We're going to be off next week, but I'd love for you guys to shoot in questions or comments or feedback. We're planning on going live May 6th. I'm going to be going to Philo that morning and setting up in Philo, but I'm going to try to
Wow.
find a spot to zoom in, to jump in and do the stream together. So I'd love to hear if you have any questions about something you want to cover. Maybe there's something you want to cover, or um, maybe there's a setup that you've done at your church that's worked really well. We'd love to bring you on the show and hear from you. This is a community and hopefully helping you as church leaders maximize and use ProPresenter to help you visually communicate the gospel well. And so I'd love to be Sheik, and I'd love to be a part of helping you do that.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Well, we did it, Sheik. It's a
We did it.
Monday.
We did it again.
Well, guys, we're praying for you. We're grateful for you and how you serve the
That's
church.
right.
Um, Keep trying to push the bounds of how you can use the technology that God's given us and our churches to communicate the gospel the best way we can. So we're praying for you. We're
Right.
for you. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out. We're here for you. And we hope you have a great week this week. Is it going to do it?
Peace. Oh, I did
There
it. I
it
got the
is.
balloons, baby.
Balloons for the end. See
Yes.
you guys.